President Donald Trump expresses frustration over the lack of a ceasefire between Putin and Zelensky. President Trump has levied tariffs on most of America's trading partners, demanding that they lower their own tariffs on American exports. Israel promises to reassert control over Gaza as the IDF continues its ground offensive. And finally, President Trump orders additional U.S. military forces to the Middle East region as the U.S. and Israel discuss possible attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kite, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. Welcome back, insiders. Now mention to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics, formerly Inside Israel News, now with a broader topic and range. So, slight rebrand, huh? What do you think of the opening? Love to hear your thoughts. I've had a good few comments on the little changes I've made over the years, and some positive, some very helpful, actually. Sometimes like, it's too loud or this or that. Let me know. Hey, I'll see what I can do to fix it. Do all my own editing, so if there's something wrong with the show, it is definitely my fault. I can't pass that along to the complaint department or pass blame onto someone else. All right. Well, Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. I've made the change. Here we are. New look, new feel. Similar to the format that I've been running the last few episodes. I'm going to kind of keep it in that general vein thus far. So it'll be one topic after another. But the name Inside Israel News just didn't suit the podcast anymore. So now it's geopolitics. So welcome back. You guys are still insiders because you're still on the inside of knowing what's going on in the world, but you're also mentioned. You can be a mensch. We're good guys here at with the listeners to formerly Inside Israel News, now Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Obviously, it'll be the same excellent content and quality that you have become accustomed to with Inside Israel News as the show transitions now over to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. I want to mention the Good Intentions newsletter, really good newsletter put up by my friend Bob Zeidman, great guy, and he puts together a lot of good conservative news on there. He put out a couple of books too, Good Intentions, after which the newsletter is named, Animal Lab, a couple of other fun ones. I've been reading a lot of fiction myself lately, trying to zone out a little. There's so much news. There's just so much going on, so much to know. I can only listen to so many podcasts in a day, and gather in so much information and go in depth on so many things. And after a little while, my brain hurts, my friends. It's like, oh, you gewalt. I can't keep it going. So I've got to listen to something, I don't know, some sci-fi or, reading a book like Bob's on, kind of the take wokeness to the nth degree, and Animal Lab's kind of an update on Animal Farm, to the modern era. In any case, great books. Check it out. Good Intentions and Animal Lab by Bob Zeidman, and of course the Good Intentions newsletter, where you can go sign up and right to your inbox will be delivered excellent news that Bob puts together rather frequently. Okay, tariff wars. Wow. First of all, this is one of those things that you get on social media, right? Everybody's an expert all of a sudden. I just love this kind of thing. It's like, every time something comes up, and you're just sitting there like, guys, I mean, honestly, people, with the exception of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I don't think any of these people had heard of Smoot-Hawley until, you know, I'll just, oh my God, that scene with Ben Stein and the, anyone, the tariffs bill, which anyone raise tariffs. I mean, great moment. But I mean, that's the only time in pop culture anyone had heard of Smoot-Hawley during the Depression. And it's like, now all of a sudden everybody's, oh, Smoot-Hawley was bad. During the Depression, was it a good idea to raise tariffs? Probably not. But at the same time, I mean, so at that time, we didn't have globalization like we have today. So a vast majority of the American economy was still very domestic, right? I mean, in terms of our trade with Britain, France, and other major powers, there was some significant trade, but most of that was American exports, right? So, all of a sudden, Smoot-Hawley destroyed the economy. You don't know what you're talking about. Be quiet. Silencio. As they say in Germany. Woo-eh! It's time to be quiet, people. Come on. There were a lot of mistakes made during the Depression. It's pretty clear that free trade wouldn't necessarily have done any good either. If Smoot-Hawley hadn't passed, it probably wouldn't have made any difference. The problems with the Great Depression, just briefly, because these people that are going to go out there and the contractionary monetary policy, they were trying to reduce the money supply in circulation, was a huge mistake. Now, obviously, printing money is bad, so just, a vastly, ridiculously, insanely expansionist policy of just pumping money into the economy wouldn't have been a good thing either, but a mildly or moderately or reasonably expansionist policy of slowly growing the money supply is generally assumed to have been the proper approach there. All of the labor controls, all the New Deal stuff that FDR put in, the banking controls, all of that kind of stuff. Those were problems. The main thing, if you read Milton Friedman and really get to understand the crux of the free marketeers' arguments on the Great Depression, okay, and I'm disambiguating that from my own family's experiences because my grandfather had a heck of a time. He and grandma had a heck of a time during the Depression, growing up as teenagers during it. But the main thing was that the Federal Reserve didn't, give money to the banks, to the local banks. The big banks, they bailed out. The local banks, they did not. And that led to runs on banks and thus, all the trouble with the banking. And then FDR's policies, all these, acronym soups, the AAA and the da-da-da, all this stuff, all of these federal projects, they artificially raised labor costs because they were taking up some of the excess labor out there, and that slowed the recovery. So we ended up having a recession during the recovery from a depression. It's not economically possible. If you ask economists, well, when you're recovering from a depression, you can't have a recession because there's just a slow upward work of economic growth for some time. But FDR managed to make it happen. So there were a lot of problems during the Depression. It's one of these things, I got 99 problems and Smoot-Hawley ain't one of them. Was it a good idea? Probably not. Did it do any real harm? Not really. So that's just funny. And the people go, the McKinley tariffs, right before a depression. The McKinley tariffs proved to be problematic. The McKinley Tariff Act, for reasons that weren't McKinley's fault. There were things put in the bill that weren't really his idea. This is Congress, right? Compromises. So the particularly problematic sections of that. But anyway, the point is, protectionism has its pros and cons. All right, and all things being equal in a normal environment of globalization, it's not a great idea to be too protectionist. Now, I'd like to go back and note that, people have been running around with George W. Bush and his comments on tariffs. President George W. Bush raised steel tariffs. The Bush administration, the second Bush administration, Bush 2, Bush Jr., whatever you want to call it, Bush the second, they raised tariffs too. So, don't feed me a line here. Okay, don't pull my leg. I remember, I was there. I remember it happening because for one moment, a lot of the unions who are generally for protectionism kind of toned down their rhetoric on the Bush administration a little bit because they were actually helping the steelworkers and what. And there is that argument to be made. Look, labor costs are very high here, and they're not going down. We don't have the population. Gen Z is smaller than the millennials. There are not young people to work, okay? And all these people, well, what is immigration? There aren't enough skilled people in the world to, you know what I mean? It's not a matter of just bringing a whole bunch of people. We need skilled labor. We need Americans, people who were raised and educated, not in the woke schools, unfortunately, but, highly capable people to go work in these things. Now, we can bring in a certain number of unskilled people per year, and, we should, those people should come here legally. Like, we should know who they are and what vaccines they've had and, what their criminal backgrounds are, and this kind of thing. Preferably people with families so that their children will grow up and be very productive citizens here as well. They'd be most welcome. But at the end of the day, those unskilled people and even, the few skilled people we bring in from out of the country don't make that big a difference. We really need tens of millions more Americans. Well, I'm doing my part. I have 7 children. So I'm doing what I can. There are lots of little kids running around in my house that are ready to take up the mantle for the next generation. But still, that's just the reality situation. Anyway, tariffs. So, again, all things being equal, this probably wouldn't be a good idea to hit the world with a whole bunch of tariffs. But, my friends, all things are not equal. We are in a period of deglobalization. And you don't have to take it from me. Peter Zion's been out there running around talking about it for a decade now. And, whatever you think of me, people generally think Peter Zion knows what he's talking about most of the time. He gets a few things wrong, and the Trump derangement syndrome is unnecessary. But hey, what can you do? Anyway, but the fact is, the world is changing. Demographics are changing around the world. China's no longer having the population growth to sustain the low cost of manufacturing. Labor costs are lower in Mexico than China, so the labor is going to Mexico, right? When you need the cheap labor, China's not the place to go. Southeast Asia, but likewise, they've got demographic problems coming down the road. So we have all these things going on in the world. Europe is dying. They've got major demographic problems. So the world is deglobalizing. The globalization, I don't want to, it's not like the sky is falling. It's all going to come to an end. But the fact is, it is no longer profitable for us. It is no longer as beneficial to the American consumer to be bringing in these cheap goods from overseas because they're not going to be cheap. So ultimately, over the next 25 years, all of that manufacturing is going to come back to the United States, and we're going to make things here because we're more efficient, we're higher tech, and we have access to absolutely the best, most productive, best educated labor pool in the world, the highest quality people on the planet. All right. And we have that two ways because we have the American youth, our blood, and we can bring in some of the best and skilled people from outside the country. Now, they're not enough, I was saying, but they are out there, right? So we can do this, my friends. Anyway, that manufacturing base is going to come back to the U.S. The question is how? Do we wait for China to collapse? Right? Peter Zion makes the point, and a number of people have been talking about it for some time. There could come a day when goods from China just stop, right? Where the stuff just stops coming in. And where all of a sudden, having your food, grown in South America, packaged in Vietnam, and then shipped to the U.S. might not be so profitable, right? Because you could package it, ship it from South America to the United States and process it here less expensively, right? That day is coming. Processing is still not really feasible in North America as much as it was at one time, but, it's coming, right? Anyway. The point is, the world's changing. The global trade and all this stuff of, we make something, a part here in the U.S., and we send it to, the Philippines and get something done to it there, and it goes to Thailand and has something else added to it, and then it comes back to America to be assembled into an engine or something. Those days are over, right? That's slowly going away. Well, how do we expedite the process of bringing those jobs back to the United States, right? Well, Donald Trump's doing that. With tariffs. These tariffs are absolutely amazing in that regard. So we've got, $500 billion from Apple coming back to the U.S. We have hundreds of billions from Boeing, Taiwan Semiconductor, right? Foreign company bringing foreign direct investment to the U.S. $100 billion to build chips, to make chip plants here in the U.S., to make those high-tech, high-quality chips that we can't live without, that are right now being made 90 miles off the coast of China. So kind of a dangerous neighborhood. Nippon Steel, tens of billions of dollars being invested in many steel plants here in the U.S. I know a lot of people didn't like that. I'm not against it. Honestly, the Japanese are very efficient in the way they run their companies. Nippon Steel is a really sharp company. They're buying some steel plants here. They were willing to sell one to buy one and this kind of thing. But they're investing in growth here in the U.S., in jobs and opportunities. Yeah, ideally we like things to be American owned, but it really doesn't matter. The point is the jobs will be here, the growth will be here, and China and Taiwan, or Japan and Taiwan, the Republic of China, ROC, the free China, in Taiwan, they'll be able to profit from it to a certain degree, and that's good for them. But the jobs will be here. So Trump is expediting that process. So the long-term forecast is amazing, my friends. I mean, we are going to be making so many cool things here in the U.S. It's not even funny. But to get there, we just have to, shock the system. And so Trump has chosen the electric shock therapy. I mean, the whole world is just, So, he's expediting it. And he talked about, the patient is healing. Well, people are talking about, what does Trump mean? You have a surgery and it hurts, and then it takes time to heal. We've seen the markets decline. We have all of the sectors of the economy that were dependent on public finance, like the media, Politico, and all these, getting public money from USAID and NASA and whatever. It's asinine. Anyway, propping up left-wing media narratives. All of that's going away, and that hurts. There are companies and industries that have been dependent on the government. So those are going into decline. But the private sector job growth is amazing. I mean, it's beaten expectations for this quarter. So we're in good shape there. Slowly but surely, all of that will come back. It actually probably won't be that slow. By this summer, I mean, it's going to be a boom time. So, I mean, they're trying to run the narrative while they can. I mean, you have to use the negativity, I guess, when you've got it. But anyway, so the fact should not be missed. I just want to add last thought, little cherry on top of this argument. When people come at you about this tariff stuff, reciprocal tariffs. Okay, so if we put tariffs on a country and then they drop their tariffs on our goods, then we drop our tariffs. I mean, so there's that. I mean, Israel has already eliminated all customs duties and tariffs they had on American goods. And, people are like, well, we're giving them money. How come they had tariffs in the first place? All countries have tariffs. That's called trade. That's how trade has been. Actually, and Israeli tariffs on American goods are, not terrible. I mean, when I lived in Israel for the time that I was there, first of all, you go to the store, everyone brags about American goods. They'd see that my dear wife, Lady Rachel, and I are Americans, and they would light up. People in Israel, Israelis love Americans. They'd light up and they'd, Americaim, and they'd come over and take us to, very proudly with their chin in the air over to the section of the store with the American goods, and they'd show us these things. I'd look at it, frying pans and electric fryers and washing machines, all this kind of stuff. And I'd look at this, and we, my dear wife and I'd look at each other aghast. Where is this stuff for us? Like, how come we can't buy American-made frying pans and American electric fryers? And I mean, where was this stuff when, where's the stuff at Walmart, right? Because, we don't sell this stuff in America. Like, you can't buy this stuff. And the prices were pretty reasonable. A little bit higher than what you might pay in Walmart once you did the conversion from, shekels to dollars. But, they love American products over there. Well, whatever tariffs there were are gone now, right? Britain has made a deal with the U.S. We're going to keep tariffs low on Britain. So this is the first major benefit to Britain from Brexit. They're not part of the EU. They don't have to deal with the 20% tariffs. We made a deal with them, and it's only 10%. So we're going to have trade with Britain. Britain really can't do free trade with the U.S. Our economy would just pummel them right now. They really need time to rebuild their economy. And Sir Keir is not the one to do it. But we'll see what the next election holds for Britain. But this is a major diplomatic victory for Keir Starmer. And I've told you before, I will give credit where credit is due, right? Sir Keir Starmer is doing quite well. diplomatically in dealing with the Trump administration and retaining Britain's position as a major player in Europe and a major intermediary, given their special relationship with the United States. Now, that's not a guarantee. Just because you have a prime minister in Britain does not mean that they're necessarily going to be close with the U.S. John Major was not really a great intermediary. Didn't do a very good job. Tony Blair was awesome. Incredible work with the U.S., both with Bill Clinton and the Bush administration. He did a lot, both intermediating between the U.S. and Europe, but also in the Middle East. Okay, so there you go. But, already Canada, Mexico, all these countries are caving. We're making deals with people. It's going to improve our trade relationships. USMCA is about to be renegotiated. That's a really good thing. So, we're going to get good deals out of all of this, okay? If you want access to the largest consumer economy in the world, you have to do so on our terms. And we're not selling our people down the river anymore. Working class people are, just... we're tired of it. Us landsmen out here are working our tuchuses off, running this country, and, they keep dumping on us. Well, no more. Okay, so the tariffs, as I mentioned last time, Batya Ungar-Sargon arguing with Bill Maher. First of all, I don't know why. I've told you guys before, when I listen to the show, it's torture for me, because every time I make one little mistake, I'm like, what did I do there? I think I referred to her as Amy Batya instead of Batya Ungar-Sargon. Anyway, I had Amy Coney Barrett in mind. My autistic brain every now and then gets crosswired, so oops. That's my caveat there. Obviously, I botched that one. Batya is a great name, by the way. Is daughter of the Lord, daughter of God. Great name. Batya Ungar-Sargon was explaining to Bill Maher that, this is how we transfer wealth back to the middle class and away from the elites. And that's what Trump is doing here. This is all for the middle class. And when you look at it, the UAW, United Auto Workers, are out there praising Trump, right? Who would have thought the UAW would be praising a Republican administration? It's just unbelievable. I would, if you told me that a few years ago, I would not have believed it. Okay. The signal scandal, I have to comment on it, my friends, but I don't want to, so let's just skip it. Nah, never mind. I got to say something. It's dumb. Okay, we all know it's dumb. Number of government officials now. It's known that national security officials in the Biden administration were also using Signal for communication. Signal is a messaging app. It's relatively private. No, it's not a government. Instant messaging, protected, secured, encrypted, and all that kind of thing. They were having a conversation. One more time, because I've had to say it several times on X, no classified information was given out over the chat. No classified information was given out over the chat. Classified information is information that is deemed classified by, our national security apparatus, right? No, so the timing of the attack and that kind of stuff, like 2 hours. Okay. That's confidential information. That should not be going out publicly. A journalist should not be in the chat. Obviously, Mike Waltz added him by accident. But all these people, Mike Waltz should resign. For what? We had this botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. 13 American service members died, right? We have 13 more Gold Star families today than we had, in 2020 because the Biden administration, could not manage the withdrawal from Afghanistan, right? No one resigned. So if no one resigned over that, we could get a lot worse before, if losing a war doesn't cost you your job, I don't know what does. Okay, if at that point when that happened, President Biden should have resigned, Kamala Harris should have resigned. There should have been, that whole administration. Basically, the whole admin should have resigned, and they should have appointed someone, moderate, to be a caretaker government until the next election. Just my opinion. But you remember what I said. If you go back and listen to the episode back in 2021, I said, unfortunately, when the Taliban went on their offensive, the only thing to do was to send our troops back in there and knock them back on their tuchuses. Putting them on the back foot would force them back to the negotiating table. Not pretty, not fun, not what I'd want to do. But you don't have a choice. Now the Taliban's a serious thorn in our side out there. Anyway, the signal scandal is a big deal because it's the only deal. There's nothing else to talk about. People are, oh, the economy, whatever. Short term, there are some people who perceive that, the economy is going down or whatever. It's not really a big deal. It's a nothing burger. They don't have anything. So this is the one mistake that the administration's made that people have been able to get on. There have been a couple of little things in this administration, but nothing big. So that's what I have to say about that. Was it dumb? Yes. Should it have happened? No. Is it a big deal? No. It's nothing, really. And obviously they won't do that again. On the other hand, now that we have Elon Musk hanging around the halls of power, can we get an encrypted messaging app for the government to use so that people can just communicate and be protected? I mean, it shouldn't be impossible. All right, special elections. I have to comment on this. Everyone's focused on the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, and obviously Crawford won, Shamil lost. That's not good. That has serious implications for the right. It was a blowout. We didn't have a good ground game. We've heard all the things. Okay, I don't disagree with all of those assertions. I don't like that people are making too big a deal out of it. We have this tendency toward fatalism. We just immediately focus on the negative. The sky is falling, the world is ending, all this kind of thing. But the fact is, there's a lot of good news. Okay. First of all, Randy Fine and Jimmy Patronis won in Florida. We had the two special elections. One of them, Patronis, replaced Matt Gaetz, good riddance, in that seat. So, we have two Republican wins. Now, people know, well, the margin shifted. Special elections in midterm tend to go against the incumbent party. The fact that Republicans won these is the important part, okay? The fact of politics is special elections tend to go toward the opposition and midterms and that kind of thing. Republicans are actually doing remarkably well. I think come 2026, we're going to see possibly lower margins for Republicans across the country, but, likely a win. Obviously, if the economy picks up and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So let's focus on the positive. Big deal in Wisconsin, though, was the passage of the voter ID law. It's like, over 60%. Huge margins. So obviously a lot of people voted for voter ID and voted for the Democrat Supreme Court justice. Okay. But the fact is, that's huge. Voter ID requirements in swing states are massive. A lot of illegals are being deported. A lot are self-deporting, but there are still a good number here. And obviously, the Dems are challenging Trump's executive order on trying to prevent non-citizens from voting. This is a big issue. Like, they need voters, and legal U.S. citizens don't want to vote for the Democrats anymore. So they're desperate to keep these, illegals voting. Anyway, the voter ID requirement is huge. More of that, the merrier. That will help a great deal in the future. Regardless of what you think about whether illegals are voting and all that, a tinfoil hat if you think that, oh, you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about. The reality is, right and left, Americans are not confident in our elections. And that's a problem. So we rebuild confidence by requiring voter ID, by changing the processes so that everyone feels it's fair. You should not, have Republicans or Democrats in large numbers. Like, you shouldn't have 1 in 3 Americans running around saying, I don't trust our elections. We need that trust to increase. And I can't just, there are some people that are always like, well, my guy didn't win, so I don't trust the election. There's that. But really, solidly, a third of Americans don't trust our elections or didn't before the November election. That's terrible. No European country would tolerate that. You know what I'm saying? They would, if they had an election in Germany. They had an election in Berlin and the mayoral election, and there were all these irregularities. There was a marathon being run. People couldn't get into voting booths. Some closed early, some closed late. There were all kinds of problems. And so the German Supreme Court required a rerun of the election, right? Those are minor things. If a third of Germans didn't believe their elections were fair, the Bundestag would pass a tough new election law establishing fairness, what everyone could, tight controls to make sure everyone believed the elections were fair, and they would dissolve parliament and hold new elections, right? That's how any other country would handle this. But in America, we have this lack of faith. So we need to restore that faith. Voter ID is a good start. And one of many things that are needed, like we can't have counting going on a month after the election. Finding out, 2 weeks later that a member of Congress we thought had won re-election didn't. I mean, this is ridiculous, my friends. We all know that we can't trust that kind of nonsense. We have an election night election, right? You count the ballots. By the next day, the last ballot should be counted, right? So everything should be done election night as much as possible. You got your last minute ballots, you count the next day, and you should be able to certify the election by the Thursday or the Friday of the week of the election, right? We have our elections on Tuesday, obviously. So you get my point. I mean, we need to clamp down on that. But anyway, there's good news. So in 4 major elections, we won 3 of them. Don't be fatalist. Now, the loss of Schmiel to Crawford was a big deal. And that could be a problem for redistricting and whether Republicans will keep the House and all this kind of thing. It's a big deal. Right, as Ted Cruz is fond of saying, it's a big damn deal. He's not wrong. That is a problem, and we definitely need to work on our game plan. Right, I mean, if you lose a game, right, any game, baseball, football, okay, you lose a football game, you're like, man, our running game was not on point this game, and our passing game is lacking, and our defense didn't get the big plays that shut down their offense. So let's change what we do. I mean, now we need to improve. We need to be better. Better defense, better passing, better rush. Well, that's how we do things in politics. Obviously, the GOP needs a better ground game, and that's going to have to change. All right. There are more protests on college campuses. We have big problems. These neo-Nazi, pro-Palestinian, river to the sea and other Holocausts there will be people. These nutters, it's dangerous. God, you can't be a Jew on campus anymore. The anti-Semitism is getting thick. So this continues to be an ongoing problem. As you know, if you've been a longtime listener, I've been talking about this for years. It's been a big issue for me on talking about anti-Semitism in the U.S. Because during the 1920s, there was a lot of radicalism in universities in Germany. And it has been noted there is a distinct correlation. There is a we are aware of the historical trend. Historians will tell you that there was a connection between the dangerous radicalism on campus in Germany in the 1920s and the rise of Adolf Hitler and the nationalists in, the Nazis, National Socialists, right? Nazi as opposed to Sozi, in 1933. So dangerous, dangerous stuff here. And now our campuses are full of radicals who hate Jews. Oy, my friends, this has got to change. We got to clamp down. I'm glad that Trump's pulling funding, but you get universities. There's a journalist who went in and did the Elon Musk thing, the Doge thing at Brown, asking people, what's 5 things you've done? And they're attacking him now and, saying that he's breaking all the rules and he's keeping private information, and they're just trying to shut him down because he's been exposing corruption there. But, you sit there and it's like, you got a campus like Brown with 9,000 students. They receive $250 million a year in federal grants. They have a $7 billion endowment. They make an 11% return on that annually, right? Student tuitions is through the roof. It's like, including, dorm costs and fees and all that. It's like $100,000 a year just to go to school there. Right. And they're running a $46 million deficit. And they're saying it could be more like $90 million next year. Wow. This is a university that has like 3,500 administrators. Between that and the faculty, they're like, at a 1 to 1.5 administrators or faculty per student at this point. I wouldn't trust anyone who has a business degree from Brown, because obviously the people who are teaching there are not, don't know anything. I mean, and no businessman would look at that and say, this is good. Like, you got to cut the staff. You got to trim the faculty. There's no reason they should have a deficit. They have plenty of money, people. Oh my God. All right. So with that, I'm gonna shift gears here to foreign affairs and Middle East stuff. But want to take a minute. I've talked in the past, had kind of a segment on Lippmann's logic, and I want to keep it going. I finally had some brain power to go back and read some of Walter Lippmann's work. I like to read nonfiction, but right now, my head, these last few months, it's been so much. But, I was reading an essay Walter Lippmann wrote, and he's talking about gauging public opinion. And obviously, you're going to probably be familiar with this, but when he wrote this stuff back in the 20s and 30s, people weren't quite aware of it. But, when you're gauging public opinion on a topic, you have to account for the fact that the public doesn't know much. Most people have heard about, tariffs now. So, you could ask people what they think about tariffs. Do they really know anything about, does the average person really understand what tariffs mean and do? I don't think so. I think if you went down the street and asked people, do you know what a tariff is? I don't know. How do tariffs work? Who collects tariffs? Where does the money go? And, who pays the tariff? Well, because ultimately the consumer, the end user, pays for everything, right? I used to do this with corporate people. We need to raise corporate taxes. And I'd say, who pays corporate taxes? Well, corporations do. Where do corporations get their money from? Where do they get their money from? Well, from their customer. Yeah, so you, the customer, pay corporate taxes. Every time you go to McDonald's and buy a Big Mac, every time you go to Walmart and buy, a gallon of milk, every time you go out and buy something from a corporation, you are paying corporate taxes. It's like, these people just don't get it. Anyway, and same thing with tariffs, okay? So you charge a tariff on a good, and when it's sold in the U.S., the consumer is paying all of the costs of that, the cost of manufacture, the cost of sale, the cost of tariffs and taxes. Okay, so there's that. But most people have an opinion now. If you'd gone back to 1997 and asked, polled Americans on what they thought about the situation in Gaza, I would be willing to bet you 99.998% of Americans didn't even know what Gaza was, wouldn't know it out of context unless you added that, this is a territory between Egypt and Israel, large Palestinian population. Back then, there were a significant number of Israelis living there too. Then people might, well, I don't like Israel. Or, well, the Palestinians need to stop the terrorism. Or, would like to see peace. We had a big movement for peace there in the late 90s. Very optimistic, rather naive. But I remember being there in that time and hoping that a peace deal could be reached. And then when it wasn't, I was a young kid and, liberal college student going around, protesting the war in Iraq and all that. And when it didn't happen, like a lot of people, I was very disillusioned. That's what led me to become a supporter of Ariel Sharon. Arik was, he had the right idea. We had to get tough. And when we got tough, then, peaceful situation was restored. But anyway, so Lippmann's just pointing out that public opinion is limited to what people know. Today, you ask people about Gaza, everyone's heard about it, more people have opinions, okay? But, you go around and ask people, what do you think about deglobalization? What do you think about manufacturing? That kind of stuff. Most people don't know a lot of stuff about this. So you do because you're insiders. You're mentioned. You know everything. But that's the kind of thing. So he just points out that you want to gauge public opinion on things, but you also want to have that caveat that people just don't know a lot about a topic. And oftentimes, back in his days, just saying, look, if somebody's read a newspaper article, they only know what was in the newspaper article and they only know the information presented by that particular journalist. Now, back in the 20s and 30s, we still had journalism to a certain degree, but even so, everything has an angle. Everything has a bias, okay? So just an important thing to bear in mind. So when we get public opinion polls that say 68% Americans support Ukraine, we've had enough news out there. I think people have the opportunity to form their opinion by now. But if you'd asked that question in 2021, Ukraine was, people were the left were upset at Ukraine because they supported Trump during the fake impeachment nonsense. And, then Republicans got upset because Biden was sending money to Ukraine and this kind of thing, and the Biden scandal and all that. So, Ukraine probably had a very negative opinion back then just because people had heard negative news on the right about Biden and on the left about them supporting, going with Trump during the fake impeachment. So the first fake impeachment. Anyway, all this kind of stuff. So there you go. All right. So when I get back from the break, be talking about the ceasefire, and then I'll move on to Middle East stuff. So now Donald Trump is upset with Zelensky and Putin over the ceasefire deal. So he tweeted out, he's disappointed in both of them. And I just, it's not Trump derangement syndrome. Don't get me wrong. I voted for the guy and I generally support the policies that he's implementing. Okay. But let's take that headline back to 1940, right? Roosevelt is frustrated and disappointed at Churchill and Hitler over failure to make peace in Europe. Come on, people. Now, on the other hand, I told you this would happen. I told you this would happen last summer. I talked about it, how, Trump would try to make peace and Putin will not make peace. He can't. He's bet the whole country on this war. How do I know that? And the Trump administration people don't. And the Biden administration people don't. I mean, how is it that I know these things and I predict these things and I can say these things? I mean, obviously I'm free to say what I want to say because I'm just a podcaster. I'm just a schmo, just a lawnsman out here, a guy who works for a living. What do I know? I mean, these people with degrees from Brown University, Yale, Harvard, and, they go to work in the government and they don't know anything. They know some things, but I mean, what I'm saying? Like, I know more than they do. Why is this the case? Why do I predict these things? How do I know this stuff? Every now and then I get a big head from this, I do this show to inform you guys because I want you guys to know the truth. It's from the heart. So you guys will know what's going on. Don't make any money off of it. It costs me money to make, actually, because I buy microphones and this kind of stuff. It costs me a lot of time and effort. But I do this for you guys. I like to talk. If you like to listen and you want to know what's going on in the world, here we go. But every now and then something like this happens and it's like I'm completely right. And I just, wow. Anyway. So this whole situation underscores for me the wrong-headed nature of the approach. So I told you that I will praise where praise is due and I will criticize where criticism is due. And so I'm about to criticize the Trump administration, and quite significantly so. We have, this wrong-headed approach to the situation right from the start. Okay. And I'm going to explain why, even economically, even for the Trump agenda, like there were better ways to approach this. You have a situation here where Russia's the aggressor. Russia started this war. All this nonsense. NATO encroachment. NATO never attacked Russia. NATO would never attack Russia. NATO is a defensive alliance. Like if Poland invaded Russia, we're not obligated to defend Poland. Right, because they engaged in aggressive war. If Russia invades Poland, we are obligated to defend Poland because, they're being attacked. That's the nature of a defensive alliance. And yes, it's possible to provoke others. There was no provocation here, right? Ukraine was a peaceful country. They didn't even have an army before 2014, before they were invaded the first time. So there's just no argument there. Anyway, so obviously the pressure should have been brought on Russia for the beginning. Like, we're bullying our friend to be willing to make peace with the bully. And then we go to the bully, and funny thing, he doesn't want to stop bullying. Until he's punched in the face, until the bully gets hurt, the bully's going to keep on bullying, So the pressure should have been brought to bear on them in the first place. Instead, we've had all of this pressure on Zelensky and Ukraine, all the attention on them, the fireside spat in the White House, all of this nonsense to get Ukraine to sign this mineral deal that, it's theft. I mean, we've never done this to an ally before. We don't go to Israel and say we want, half of your manufactured goods or half the technology you develop. Allies are allies. They're our friends. Right? Why do we need this? Now, I understand the concept of creating a U.S. interest in Ukraine that we then have to defend. But still, it's not necessary. Meanwhile, Trump now puts out a tweet saying he will, if Russia doesn't sign the ceasefire, he's going to put 500% tariffs on anyone buying Russian oil or gas. Brilliant! That is how you do this. And if we'd done that from the beginning, Russia would have been pressured to make a real ceasefire deal, okay? There's no downside to that, right? I mean, if Europe and India and other countries, China can't, China too, yeah. I mean, if they can't buy oil from Russia, where are they going to buy it from? Where are they going to get their gas? From us, right? From the United States of America. We are going to pump that gas. We're going to, liquefy that. We're going to ship it. We're going to pump the oil. We're going to make this thing go. Drill, baby, drill. It's good for us. Right? bad for Russia. We could even consider seizing the Shadow Fleet. All these ships running without their transponders, these old Russian ships that are falling apart, and some of them are sinking here and there. They're full of oil. I mean, they are an environmental hazard. But Russia's running these ancient ships out there because they can't sell their oil the other way. If we started seizing those, Russia would be in deep trouble. So you apply that pressure to Russia, Russia will have to consider a ceasefire, right? But Putin isn't feeling the pressure. Right now, we just had a report that from South Korea that another 3,000 North Korean troops, are on their way to Russia. Putin is a plan now to draft more young men throughout Russia, and he's preparing for a 6 to 9 month offensive. 69 months, 6 to 9 months. Yeah, you can tell I've got kids. Silly movies. Anyway, a 6 to 9 month offensive. That's his plan. That's not the kind of thing you do when you're preparing for a ceasefire. So all the stuff we did that helped strengthen the ruble and strengthen the Russian economy, that helped strengthen Russian morale and hurt our allies in Ukraine and hurt our friends in Europe, for nothing. It has accomplished absolutely nothing. And I told you as much in the summer. How did I know that and Trump didn't? You know, he just fired 2 people from his national security team. Maybe he needs new advisors. Hey, give me a call. I'll be happy to go schlep up there to Washington and speak truth to power. I could be, something like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or whatever. I mean, regular lawnsman walking around with these guys who think they're all that. And I'm just like, the guy who cleans the floor, his opinion matters to me more than most of these suits with their experts and whatever, because the guy who cleans the floor is a real person. You know what I mean? He's a real guy like you and me, somebody that actually works for a living. And if that guy's having a hard time, the country is not in good shape, right? If the suits are making all the money and having fun and whatever, I mean, come on, people. Anyway, so there we are. And it's given me a big head because I told you so. But here we are. And if Trump really does crack down on Russia, and Russia, if those sanctions are, those tariffs are imposed, Russia will have to consider a ceasefire. It would be a great thing, but they're saying that it won't be in effect before the Easter holiday, and Pesach, Passover's coming up. That usually comes about the week before. Usually the weekend that it ends is Easter weekend. But these things move around the calendar because, of course, Passover is on the lunar calendar. We have a lunar calendar with 12 months, and we add a 13th month. It's interposed 7 times every 19-year cycle. So you realign the lunar with the solar. It's complicated stuff. But in any case, we're coming up on the holiday. Chances are there won't be a ceasefire before then. Switching over to Israel, Israel is on the move in Gaza. Looks like Israel's going to reclaim control of about 40% of Gaza in this new ground offensive. They're cutting it into segments again. A lot of terrorist leaders have been whacked, as usual. Precision strikes where they can hit an apartment building and just kill that one terrorist. And as always, Israel calls the surrounding apartments and says, hey, get out. Right, we're about to attack. Which means that the bad guys could be warned. But, right now, Hamas isn't all that popular. So Israel is moving back in. And Bibi Netanyahu has said that Israel will reassert control over Gaza. I mean, it's not like we have our Arab friends are interested in going in and helping out. It's been talked about, but it isn't being done. So Israel just has to go reassert control there. Not what I want, not the way anyone wants. No one in Israel wants this. Some of the far right want it because they think they can, get territory there and start settling it again. That's not going to happen. But there's no way for Israel to let that territory go. We can't leave Hamas in charge there. Been a bunch of protests. There've been all these people talking about the protests. I did post them, a few X posts myself, just to make the point that, when you try to protest in Gaza, it's brutal. The response. Those were largely organized by the Palestinian Authority, by Fatah, right? The other terrorist organization run by Mahmoud Abbas that has its headquarters over in Judea and Samaria, not in Gaza, right? What the international press erroneously calls the West Bank. But up in Ramallah, that's their center of power. they're pushing, guys to protest down there. So, trying to assert control. Bibi said that, we don't really want the PA in control down there either. I mean, no terrorist organization should be running it. Not Fatah, not Islamic Jihad, not PFLP, and certainly not Hamas, right? All these organizations have to go. So that the situation is fluid. Israel's moving in, asserting control. Donald Trump has said he might do something. We will see. But as always, if Hamas releases the hostages and surrenders, this is over. I mean, what can you say? Hamas revised their numbers again to point out that 72% of the people killed in Gaza were military-age young men. Right? 3 out of 4 people killed in Gaza were young men. Now, that means of the remaining quarter, a lot of those are older men, the leadership, right? Very few civilian casualties, unintended consequences, your collateral damage, right? Israel is not trying to kill civilians in Gaza. We are trying to get the bad guys. That's what you do when you're defending yourself. So more proof of that. Israel keeps its thumb on Hezbollah. They've whacked a couple more Hezbollah leaders and, again, in precision strikes, hit some ammo. They're keeping their thumb on them as well in Lebanon. So Israelis can live in relative peace. These days, the rocket problems that they have, the sirens go off, it's usually ballistic missiles fired from Yemen. So with the U.S. working there to help keep the Houthis down, there's a good chance that, that will stop in time. But, unfortunately, when someone launches a ballistic missile, it's a whole region of Israel that could be the target. You don't know exactly where it's going to fall. So, and while we have a really good record of intercepting these things, there's no guarantee. So you have to get people to shelters. It's miserable. But anyway, there's that. Okay, Iran. So we have 7 B-2 bombers that have been deployed to Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands. Really important that Britain doesn't give them up, right? And if they did, the U.S. should buy Diego Garcia ourselves. Like, that should go to us, not to the Maldives. In any case, we have 7 bombers there, right? The B-2 bomber, that's a third of the fleet, by the way, a little bit more in terms of operational aircraft. We only built 21 B-2 bombers. They can drop the GBUs, those big bunker buster bombs. They're also stealth. So, I mean, the Iranians don't really have air defense to begin with because Israel has basically whacked them. If there is a bombing campaign, obviously Israel and the U.S. are talking about doing this together. The CENTCOM commander has been meeting with leaders of the IDF. There's been a lot of talk back and forth of a coordinated attack. The Israelis can overfly Iraq and disable the air defenses, and then U.S. bombers could just go in and go to work. B-1s have been sent to the region as well. The B-1 bomber also carries big bombs, big heavy bombs, stuff that the F-35 can't field. And, we drop the big bombs on these Iranian targets. We could destroy their nuclear program. That's the intended target of all this. And that would be beautiful. That would be great. Could we? Iran's nuclear program is a serious threat to the region. So there's that. Another aircraft carrier is inbound. The Carl Vinson is headed out from San Diego. Going to sail on down into the Indian Ocean to the Arabian Sea and be ready to help out if need be. We have assets in the region. Plenty of there are already 2 aircraft carriers there. So it's like 3 aircraft carriers. There's a Marine mobile unit there, an MEU, Mobile Expeditionary Unit, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. So we got an MEU in the area if it's needed, but we're not really talking about major ground operations in Iran. We would need those forces if, say, Iran invaded Kuwait or tried to invade Bahrain or the UAE or something like that. If they tried to put boots on the ground there, then, we might need the Marines to go in, and we can, the Army can send, those Galaxy transports and whatever. They can bring people in as well, but, we can bring more personnel in to help defend those places quickly. But the goal here would be to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and weaken their government. Could that happen? Honestly, any day now. And this Iran nuclear program has been allowed to go on entirely too long. And it's a major threat to security in the world because while, even the North Koreans, the Norks shouldn't have nukes. They're dangerous, right? These little, unstable, dangerous regimes are not the best candidates for being responsible players in the nuclear club, right? But Iran in particular, with all their proxies, the terrorism, and the absolutely inhumane conduct of their government, these are especially dangerous people who should not have nuclear weapons. So that would be, a good thing to do. So in terms of World War III by proxy, where are we at? Trump might clamp down on Russia. Our thumb is very heavily on Iran. Iran's kind of the Italy of World War III. Probably going to be the first out, North Korea can't do much without China, right? I mean, they're helping Russia, but if Russia's kind of knocked out, North Korea's kind of isolated. They could help China, or they could choose not to help China. But basically, China's alone if we get rid of Iran and Russia from that coalition. So there you go. There was an interesting video out there. Good friend of mine, William, you know who you are, sent me could China invade Russia? It's been talked about. There's the bear and the dragon and the bear is, Tom Clancy's written on this. It's an interesting concept, that the Chinese could take the resources in Siberia. Basically, the Chinese already control eastern Russia. I mean, there's a large Chinese minority that already lives there. There's, their companies can take over the mines and the oil if they want to, except that China really doesn't have a lot of oil development technology or experience. It's kind of like in the Second World War, the Germans went out and conquered, Russia, parts of Russia. They got a hold of the oil fields in several places, and they didn't have any, they couldn't do anything with it. They didn't know they didn't have the technology or the equipment, the experience. They didn't know how to pump the oil. So it was useless to them. You would think if you're going to invade a country to take its oil that you would have the resources to use it. Anyway, okay, so there you go. But could China invade Russia? I doubt it. I mean, I think she needs Putin as a distraction. And if Russia fell apart and, all of that stuff over there, Yakutsk, all that region were kind of on its own, I think the Chinese would assert control there, not necessarily invade, but, make sure that those governments are puppet governments. But I don't know about that. Anyway, China continues to have their focus on Taiwan, and they're building these new barges that can help them get over the mud flaps and mud flaps. You can tell I work in the transportation industry. The mud flats, and try to get their troops on the ground in Taiwan. That's a lot. So they're doing everything they can to get themselves ready. And one of the things they're doing is building submarines, including new nuclear submarines. It's a great episode of the Proceedings podcast published recently about submarine construction. I highly recommend it. They're talking about, had an admiral on there talking about, modular construction and all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating. The District of Columbia, our first new boomer since 1997, since the last of the Ohio boats. To those of us, I'm a former submariner myself. Those of us in the Navy, those are our 726 boats. We always, refer to them by their hull number of the first, so the 688 boats are the Los Angeles class. We still have some of those. You have your 774 boats, your Virginias, your 21s, which are your Seawolf and Connecticut and Jimmy Carter. So you got your boats. We do this kind of thing. But these are going to be the 826 boats, the District of Columbia being the first. And they're pointing out that because it's being constructed in a modular fashion, like pieces of it are being built in different places, the boat is currently in 3 zip codes. Right, parts of it are in 3 different zip codes in the country, including Groton, Connecticut, Newport News, a couple other places, one other place. So it's like these components, then these modules have to be brought up to Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, where it's being assembled. Right, so and they're learning a lot of things, talking about how they'll be able to build the next submarine faster and all this kind of thing, because that's kind of how it works. But one of the points that came up was that at the height of the Cold War, back in the 80s, we were pumping out a boomer and 3 attack boats every year. And there were like 20,000 Americans who worked in the submarine industry, just building the submarines themselves. Right. And, they're saying, how do we get back to that? How do we get to a place where we can build more submarines and have a larger submarine fleet? Well, by all means, let's do that. But getting there is going to be complicated, but the Navy wants to get to a place where we're getting a District of Columbia class boomer every year, basically, and 2 Virginias, right? 2 attack boats. That would be good. It'd be a good start because we've built like 20 Virginias so far, and we're still running almost 40 of the old 688 boats, the Los Angeles class. That they're the 688 I's, the modern. The eyes were kind of an improvement on the last class, and they've got the vertical launch tubes, and they've got forward bow planes, instead of the sailplanes. We're gonna have sailplanes on the Columbia, but anyway, I mean, a lot of things changed now. We're switched to electric power to reduce vibration. We're gonna have X-shaped fins. That was something the Navy experimented with back in the 50s and should have pursued. The plus-shaped fins do okay, but the X-shaped fins offer greater maneuverability. All sorts of new sub-technology out there. It's good stuff. Also, with the Virginia boats, the Utah is under construction right now, but Oklahoma and Arizona are under construction as well. And that's important because since 1941, we have not had ships under those names. In 41, obviously, Arizona was destroyed in the attack on Pearl Harbor, and Oklahoma capsized. That's turned upside down for those of you in Rio Linda. And when they righted her and took her back to the West Coast, it was determined that she was just too heavily damaged. It would cost too much to restore her to action, and it wouldn't really be worth it. We had 13 operational old battleships that were still running, and we had the 10 new ones, and aircraft carriers were really what was important. So anyway, now we're going to have an Arizona and an Oklahoma in the fleet again. So that is very cool. Good thing there. But I just wanted to take a moment. I agree with the Proceedings podcast. I'd really like to see us building more submarines to help deter China. And one thing that's coming in there is that, Boeing is developing the Orca drone submarine, and we're getting more of these unmanned drones that could be operated within the region. Say, something that could operate out of Guam or the Philippines and move in and launch torpedoes, cruise missiles, lay mines, do that kind of operation. So that will augment our manned boats, right? But they still have to be in region. So it's not quite the same capability as a full manned submarine. So anyway, we need to get that production going. So that's important to me. We need to build up our Navy, and that's an important part of how we're going to deter China. We can do more with drones, we can do more with weapons and all this kind of stuff. We need to build up our submarine fleet, and I think unmanned submarines are brilliant. And we've been looking when I was in the submarine service 25 years ago, we were talking about, maybe going back to diesel boats and having some smaller boats that we could operate kind of in the region, like, stuff we could operate out of Japan and the Philippines and kind of keep close to China that wouldn't require large crews or cost as much to operate. But the drones are just that, they're expensive, but they're just that much more capable. And of course, they don't put any lives at risk. So I think that's that. Well, with that, this is the first episode of Mensch-Kight Geopolitics, formerly Inside Israel News. So, glad to have an opportunity to bring this episode to you. Glad that you guys listen. Much appreciated. Toda rabah. We love you much. Grateful that you listen. Hope you feel informed, and the show will go forward from here. So I will say, as always, goodbye, lehitraot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes by? Every day I'm losing my mind. fantasy, ecstasy. Everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. אין שום, אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום. כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home now.